Hello there and welcome to this video where we're going to be discussing a really important topic, somewhat controversial in some ways, and that is, can public schools improve a child's behavior? There's a whole lot that we see in the news regularly about the deterioration of public schools, behaviors behind a whole lot of that. So today we'll be talking about that subject in this video. All right, this is a real important topic. A lot of things, kind of complex, a lot of things to talk about. One for sure is the legal aspect, special education laws, how that will factor into all this. Then the idea of the rights of the many versus the rights of the few, because that can come into conflict. Are schools supposed to be rehab centers? Is that really their purpose? Those topics and a whole bunch more are what we'll be covering in this video. All right, we do need to talk about the legal aspects, and there's a reason that behavior is thrown in with the special ed laws and beyond just like learning disabilities in terms of processing speed and memory and recall and all these kind of academic oriented things. But behavior gets included in that as well. And the reason has been because we haven't had a great history of treating behaviors of people who've had some mental disabilities very well. There's a pretty dark history there. So to protect those rights so that they don't get abused, we pass laws. Right, they're good laws. The challenge becomes when these laws now have gone to an extent where you can't. I'll give you some examples. There's something called IEP meetings, which are what we have to develop an individual education plan. And if a child has a classification as a behavioral impairment, and it could be from ADD, it could be from a variety of different classifications. But if they act up and get themselves in trouble, you can't necessarily suspend them or automatically send them to another school, or your behavior plans get limited with what you can do if the behavior was a result of the disability. Now, this opens up a whole can of worms in the fact that, all right, so they determined that the kid acted impulsively and he punched somebody because, it's part of his ADD and didn't think it through. Well, we now have to keep them in the school building with some other plans in place to help prevent that from happening again. But that sets up this whole conflict between the rights of the many and the rights of the few. There have been studies. There was one study done by an independent news media organization that showed that when there is disruptive behavior, and I mean, do we really need a study to understand that when there's disruptive behavior, learning of everybody is impacted? Teachers begin to burn out when they're constantly having to deal with a student who's regularly acting out, and very often in really disruptive ways, not just little annoying behaviors, but like can be violent. Many of you have probably seen some of these viral videos that kids are taking now in schools of some assault on a teacher or another student. Those sort of behaviors, if they're determined to be part of the kid's special ed classification, you can't just automatically suspend them or send them to another school. There's a kind of guiding principle here, and that is the least restrictive environment, meaning kid has to fail being in the regular classroom with no supports. And then, okay, they can go in there, but now they need to have an ed tech and a behavior plan. Okay, that doesn't work. Now you can put them in a special ed classroom, but still in the main building, and they can go to some classes, but not others. You keep getting a failure cycle going if the behaviors are bad enough, and then they end up in I ran a couple of day treatment programs, right? So I worked in one, started another from scratch. That was like the last resort within the school structure, right? So we've got to have that conversation about where the rights of the many outweigh the right of an individual, and where are those rights drawn. That's a conversation that must be had, because we've gone too far, given way too many rights to the kid who's misbehaving. And I want to talk for a moment about expulsion and what the real purpose of it, right? Often people are thinking of expulsion as a penalty, as a consequence. And there's data that shows kids who get expelled are 3 times more likely to drop out, and the behavior is not going to go away. Expulsion is not about rehabilitating the behavior. It really never was intended to be. It is essentially saying that you aren't meeting our standards of behavior, you cannot be here. And that is to protect the rights of the many. Person is disruptive behavior, regularly in trouble, whatever the standards are, if you can't meet those, you're gone. Now, it used to be, once upon a time, in my mom's generation, you could get expelled from school for things like cheating. Like cheating, I hate to admit this, but cheating gets barely a slap on the wrist nowadays. That level of honesty just isn't expected anymore. We say it is, but the consequences for that sort of behavior, essentially, there aren't any. We need to be thinking in terms, again, what the purposes of expulsion is. Not about correcting behavior. It's about getting that person somewhere else where we can fix the behavior. If you understand that, then we can have a much more reasonable conversation about how do we go about determining who should be expelled from schools. All right, that kind of leads us into this question about what's the purpose of schools, and are they behavioral centers, right? Are we about trying to rehab behavior? Now, simple level, yes, we are, especially at elementary school, right? If we can begin to help kids, especially kids who've come from some, at age 5, maybe even earlier, you begin to see some of these behaviors in preschool, what have you, coming from some pretty hard backgrounds, never really learning good behaviors, seeing a lot of inappropriate behaviors, and they're coming into public schools and beginning to exhibit those behaviors. If we have well-structured programs in elementary school to begin to address these behaviors, then we can solve the problem before it escalates too much. And those that we can't, those at a young age where we're seeing some really serious behaviors, then we've got to really probably say, this is not the place for public school. This is not our job. We have many other people we need to educate. So now we get into the whole question about things like criminal justice system and behavior rehabilitation, and at what age, and programs for that, and the cost effectiveness, and all of these conversations. But once we determine how broadly we want to define this for public schools, then that will lead to other conversations about what the right solutions are. Now, there is a lot public schools can do, and there's some good things that are happening in public schools. All right, so what are public schools doing? Well, there is positive behavior interventions that are, it's a behavioral philosophy and plan that a lot of teachers are getting trained in this. That is something that is working well and doing more. It's understanding that behavior needs to be taught regularly, consistently. Negative behavior is interrupted. That's it on a nutshell. Restorative practices is another philosophical underpinning where it's about teaching kids that if you make mistakes and you do harm, we need to try to fix that and repair that whatever way we can. And there's a whole defined process for that. That that gets some really good results. Social emotional learning is another one, and also teaching about understanding the root cause. It's not people aren't their behavior. It sounds so simple, but it can be profound when you have that belief woven in. What's missing from this list is mindset training, and mindset underpins all of those. So that's really where it should begin, and take what's working and get it applied. This is, I had like 10 minutes to try to get this in. It's a big issue. Parents, you got to get involved with it. Uh, as always, I do suggest and ask you to subscribe to my channel. We've got lots of good videos out there. You also might be interested in registering for one of my free webinars in particular. You might want to register for Enhance Your Child's Performance to Next Level Success in Academics, Athletics, the Arts, and Life. So register for that today, and I'll see you in another video.